We'd just like to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Melanie Audrey and I'm the Key Relationships Manager at Engineers Without Borders. It's a shame we can't physically get together today to celebrate Reconciliation Week, but we can show respect to country from where we are. For thousands of years, the original inhabitants of Australia occupied the lands with very different boundaries than today, centred on intimate cultural relationships with the land and sea. So from my workplace in North Melbourne to yours, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to all elders past, present and emerging from all the lands with which we're meeting. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind us that Australia is the only country in the Commonwealth that does not have a treaty with its First Nations people. So in terms of setting the scene, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Reconciliation Walks of 2000, where people came together to walk on bridges and roads across the nation and to show their support for a more reconciled Australia. Today is the final day of Reconciliation Week, and I'd like to acknowledge the enormity of two significant and disturbing events of the past week: the destruction of the Juakan Gorge cultural site by Rio Tinto, and also the death of George Floyd. I'd like us to take a moment to ground down and breathe. You can close your eyes if you wish. Just like to acknowledge the losses, to reflect on the theme of this year's Reconciliation Week, which is being in it together, to invite us to contemplate our individual, our organisational, our sector's role in being in this together, and to visualise what action looks like. What can we engineers do? So when you're ready, I'd like you to open your eyes and come back into our online space. So before we delve into our topic for today, I'll just run you through the format and how you can be involved, and we dearly hope that you will be. So we've got two parts. The first part, I'll be chatting with our panelists, who I'm very keen to introduce you to. The second part, we will actually be going to the attendees and asking you for your questions, and we'll actually be able to beam you into the panelist section. For the panelists, your mics are off, I hope. So when you're ready to speak, just to unmic yourself. From a timekeeping perspective, we'll just try and stay on topic. I can mute you mid-rant, but I don't want to. Feel free to pass the mic to each other. It doesn't need to come back to me each time. So for our audience, how to play from home. We actually have two people in the background doing tech. Thank you, Luella and Beatrix. So as we chat, you can actually enter your questions into the Q&A function. So you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. So if somebody asks a question that you would like to hear the answer to as an attendee, you can actually click on that with the thumbs up button, and that will flag to us that we don't want to miss that one. Any questions that we don't get to, we will follow up in an email after the session. So we invite you to be bold. We are in this together. There's no wrong questions. And here we go. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Erin. Erin is a senior surface water engineer. She's worked on a number of water-related projects with First Nations people. Erin has worked with multiple organisations to develop corporate social responsibility plans and reconciliation action plans. Coming from the Torres Strait, Erin knows firsthand the challenges faced by children in remote communities when trying to enter STEM-related industries. As a result, over the last 5 years, Erin has been working with EWB and communities in the Torres Straits to develop and pilot an alternative delivery method of EWB's school outreach program. Welcome, Erin. Kim's a humanitarian engineer with 15 years experience in engineering, community development and program management across Southeast Asia and Australia. She has established and managed EWB programs and projects in Timor-Leste, Cambodia and Vietnam. and is now providing opportunities for Australian engineers to contribute to a more equal Australia through our Engineering on Country program, which aims to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are able to meet their aspirations through engineering and appropriate enabling infrastructure. Welcome, Kim. Shane Kennelly is an EWB board member and the Managing Director of Kennelly Constructions and First People Recruitment Solutions. He is a proud Bundjalung man with over 20 years experience in senior executive positions. Shane has a degree in aeronautical engineering and a Master's of Business. Shane is passionate about providing long-term sustainable employment opportunities through direct employment and ensuring that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses thrive. He also wants to increase the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in STEM to ensure that they are not further marginalised due to technological advances. And finally, Andre. Andre works for Indigenous non-profit organisation, the Centre for Appropriate Technology, based out of their Cairns office. Oh, I wish I was there. He's a community engagement participatory planning, remote infrastructure and sustainable development practitioner with over 15 years experience in working with Indigenous communities, mostly on Cape York and the Torres Straits. So welcome to our panel. So straight to our questions. The first question that we had was looking at the heart of reconciliation, and that it's about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous peoples for the benefit of all Australians. So I'd like to ask you, what role can our sector play in strengthening relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians? And I might send that over to you, Kim.
Sure, I'll start, but please jump in, fellow panelists. I think it's an interesting one because presumably it's a funny format, this, because I feel like I'd love to work out who's in the audience, but I don't think we can actually do that. So I'm assuming that we've got a range of engineers and Engineers Without Borders members. So welcome everybody. It's really great to have a chat with you. And it'll be good to see your questions and answers pop up, or sorry, your questions pop up in the Q&A section down there. But assuming that there's a group of you there that work for engineering companies, I think all of us individually are able to look at the projects that we are involved with and with all of the stakeholders that are involved. So really, I think a lot of the time that stakeholder analysis looks at maybe the key financial stakeholders and maybe not all of the actual stakeholders. So in terms of strengthening relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians in a work setting, for one, ensuring that traditional owners and Aboriginal corporations are treated as a valuable stakeholder with an actual stake in the projects that affect them and their people, their land, their activities or their livelihoods, and the importance of partnerships. So I think really looking at what a partnership actually is, looking at that mutual benefit between the two partner organisations, and really making that a two-way exchange of knowledge, of resources, of networks, and leveraging each other's knowledge and understanding and skills to be able to start bridging that divide, and building those relationships and strengthening that understanding between those. So if you don't currently have groups that are represented in your stakeholder groups, if you don't currently have Aboriginal people and Aboriginal community groups, then maybe work out how you can, who are affected, and who could be involved with your project and make them an active participant in these projects. So I think sometimes that's not possible directly, and sometimes that's better enabled through facilitating organisations. So for example, Engineers Without Borders has partnered with CAT, see what I'm doing, Andre, for the last maybe 10 years. So there's a huge amount of trust and respect there for the work that they do, for the relationships that they hold and honour, and their collaborative approach. And I think having that access directly to communities that have a trusted relationship with Andre or with the Centre for Appropriate Technology is a huge benefit for EWB, and something that we don't necessarily have access to on our own without having that process facilitated, and real amount of learning that goes on both sides of that equation, but especially for us to learn from Andre and then from partners that Kat has as well. So I don't know if that sort of links in, Andre. I'll throw that over to you.
Nice work, Kim. Yeah, I'd love to hear you build on that, Andre.
I feel like the white male should be the last one to speak in this space. So I'd encourage somebody else to have a go first, if that's all right.
That's fine. Would any of our other panelists like to take the lead? Perhaps we could go over to you, Shane.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I guess first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people. I'm currently in Darwin. I want to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and also reach out to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that happen to be on this call and everyone else that's involved. It's a fantastic week for us to all get involved, and I guess, you know, the theme of Reconciliation Week is we're all in this together, and I think it's probably more important than ever with the current events that are occurring around the world. And you know, we've seen unfortunately a death in custody, and it's something that obviously resonates pretty strongly here in Australia with you know, over 300 odd deaths in custody here in our own country. And I think reconciliation is something that we can all play a part of, and I guess it comes back to you know, truth telling and all of us understanding the rich history of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and we've got to reach out and connect and understand where we've come from to where we are today. And I think that's an important part of us being able to move forward as a country to achieve reconciliation. And I guess reconciliation started out more as a government agenda, but you know, it's more than that now. And I think if we don't all get involved in that process, then we won't be able to move forward as a country. And you know, and we're seeing again about connection, relationships, and trust was destroyed last week by Rio Tinto. Again, not engaging with the local community and understanding the value of such a great asset to not only that mob, but also all Australians. We've lost a huge part of our history, something that dates back over 40,000 years. And it saddens me that, that we've lost that. And I think it's just a reflection of where the mindset of some of the people in our country is at the moment. But we've got to stand above that. We've got to regroup. We've got to join together and ensure, I guess, as a community, you know, whether we're engineers or we're working in this space, that we hold the companies that we're working for to account. And it's a simple thing that we can do. We've all got reconciliation action plans, or we've got Indigenous engagement plans. Let's hold the senior management of these corporations to account to ensure that we're delivering on the actions that they've set within these plans, and they're not just a piece of paper that sits in the marketing drawer that people draw upon to promote that they're doing this work in this space, and they're not. And let's call it out and make sure that they're held to account. I could speak a lot longer on this subject, but I'll pass it over to the other panelists and get their views on this important topic.
Shane, we might go over to Erin, who actually has experience in the creation of reconciliation action plans, or RAP plans. Erin, your reflections on how we can build a plan if we don't already have one together that actually strengthens the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I guess this in a way touches on some of the points that Shane drew out. A lot of reconciliation action plans came in originally as sort of more, in some instances, a government requirement. And it was a way, I guess, a way to tick a box, which certainly are the underlying purpose of them is not for that. And there was that hope that they would develop and become these sort of meaningful ways of engaging. And I think there's a risk that they are in a way still a box ticking, but they're also a platform, I think, for organisations to start that engagement process and that reconciliation process if it's a first step. And there's also a lot of components with that. And I think for myself and my another aspect as well for engineers, it's how, of course, yes, we engage with the communities we are working in. But I think for me, looking at it from a slightly different angle, engineers shape the built environment, and we are very influential in designing and developing sort of the technical solutions that influence our everyday life. And we are creating solutions that need to not only be equitable but inclusive, or else you run the risk of further discriminating groups such as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders within whatever you are developing. So I think there's also that other aspect that you really need to look at actually creating an inclusive workforce to be able to do that, because how are you going to develop solutions if you do not have that community or that group represented within your workforce? So for me, that's also a really huge passion, because I think it's something we are lacking in our engineering industry in Australia. I don't think we have an incredibly diverse industry which enables us to do that and create these solutions that are fit for purpose for the community that we're trying to represent. So, and that can be done through a lot of ways, certainly looking at sort of how to create your company to be more inclusive. But for myself anyway, it's taking that, looking at that long-term approach and actually looking at, listen, there is barriers within our organisation, but there's barriers even before to enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students to be able to even think about entering STEM fields. So a lot of the things that I'm trying to do is ways to empower Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and break down some of those barriers to even enable them to be able to take part in that industry, to be represented in that industry, and hopefully be able to create more solutions which are fit for the communities that we need to be creating solutions for.
So what would some of those fluid pathways look like to ensure that we do have a diverse workforce and an inclusive workspace?
I guess from my end, there is a lot of things that you can do at a company level, and those discussions are happening about diversity and inclusion. But for me, I'm actually taking a very large step back, and a lot of the programs that I'm looking at with EWB is changing their school outreach program to be more fit for purpose. So I'm looking at very remote communities, predominantly sort of Indigenous communities, and actually going, well, what are the barriers? Our programs generally target high school students, which have a lot more capability of being inspired and then going, I might give engineering a go when I go to university. That is, in a way, not a possibility for a lot of students. So looking at, well, how can we facilitate that? So targeting programs, not at high school, actually working with children in primary school. I developed the programs that we're running. We're looking at working with Indigenous students from prep right through to grade 6 and also high school, doing long-term engagement, actually building trust, so that yes, we're doing engineering workshops, but we're getting to the point where kids know that we're the engineers when we turn up in the Torres Straits, and they're asking questions about, oh, what's it actually like to have to go to boarding school, or if I wanted to do this, what does it actually mean for me to leave the community? And that's things that take a long time to build, and there's some of the, I guess, barriers that we're trying to start engaging on and look at how well we can support students to try and overcome some of those.
Thanks, Erin. Andre, did you want to build on any of the points that Erin touched on from your background and your experience?
I want to actually respond to the question, but take it from another perspective. In a way, I think Erin's done a fantastic job of covering her subject, as has Shane and Kim. And that's kind of, this is obviously a STEM perspective, education perspective, and then the Indigenous perspective, as well as engineering sector perspective. I'm going to step to talking about, I work at CAT, which is the Centre for Appropriate Technology, and I'm kind of privileged to work alongside, hand in hand, and beneath Indigenous leadership inside this organisation. So, you know, it is an Indigenous organisation, but it was kind of founded on the concept of appropriate technology, which is similar to Engineers Without Borders, which is thinking about what technology is appropriate. How do we transfer that technology to other development contexts or underprivileged communities that need access to technology? That kind of generally manifests in let's do some engineering somewhere. But I like the way that our current CEO, which is Peter Renahan, who's an Aranda traditional owner, coins it. He says it's about appropriating technology. It's about assisting Indigenous communities to appropriate technology and tools and knowledge from the wider mainstream world that is outside of communities. So, you know, some kids in the Torres Straits, out in Murray Island, out in Mur, you know, wanting to access, sitting there on YouTube, you know, they in a sense, and make videos about, you know, turtle hunting or whatever. In a sense, they are appropriating technology from the broader culture to then use as a tool to promote their own culture or preserve their own culture. So as a person who's kind of an engineer, a degree in physics, one of my undergraduate degrees in physics. So I taught engineer, but I have a master's in sustainable development. So I taught human as well, and community development, which is a good combination. So I'm essentially a white fella. I have my own heritage, working in an Indigenous organization. And I think a lot of the engineers in the seminar may find themselves in a similar situation. You're a technical expert in a cross-cultural situation. And my job is not to be an expert in Indigenous culture or social development, even in a sense. It's something I've reconciled with myself over 20 years actually working in Indigenous places. I'm a representative of the sort of technical STEM sector. I'm a representative of that knowledge base, and I'm a tool for Indigenous people to use to appropriate whatever networks, links, knowledge systems I can bring for them to then apply in their context. So I work a lot with Indigenous ranger programs, conservation, land management stuff. I was out touring around the Torres Straits working on with the ranger programs on each of those islands before coronavirus hit. But a lot of that work tends to be, how do we build a ranger base? How do we fix your water supply? How do we do solar power, renewable energy? Bring the technology so that people can live comfortably on country. And so so that those Indigenous people can use that technology to then get on with whatever it is they need to do, want to do on traditional country. And that's slightly different to the Melbourne context. That's very much North Australia where I work and where our Indigenous organisation works. We're helping people to live on country. Then the assumption is that Indigenous people on country means looking after country, looking after culture. And that's yeah, you guys go and do that, but you're coming to suck out of me the kind of technology and knowledge that you need that might not be readily available to remote people. So that's kind of another way of looking at the role of the engineering sector. It's about opening up the doors and saying, well, the past used to be technology transfer. Let's give you technology. Whereas now maybe it's more like, well, here's a suite of technologies. What do you want? Grab that one, grab that one. And empowering Indigenous people to be able to make those decisions and understand that technology, people that are not, or any person that's not technically as literate as an engineer, and then to help them to then apply that technology to their context to achieve their aspirations, whatever it is. Am I rambling? Does that kind of put another spin on it?
Yeah, and a valuable spin. And I believe that the partnership between EWB and CFAT's been going for about 10 years. So we're pretty lucky to have you as a tool that sits besides our programs and helps us do our work.
Yep, we've done some fun stuff out there. Hammers and nails and diggers.
We have. Thanks, Andre. So to our next question, EWB is currently launching a new strategy which articulates a vision of technology benefiting all. There are examples in our sector, like the one that we've spoken about already, of the cultural site being blown up by Rio Tinto, where technology clearly isn't benefiting all, and we are not in this together. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what agency engineers have or need to have to be empowered to make ethical decisions in relation to their work. And I might start with Shane on this one. Oh, just unmute yourself. Yep.
Thank you. Look, again, I think there's a great opportunity for all of us to participate. And I think fundamental, as we've talked about reconciliation, is ensuring that the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are front and centre at the table in the discussions. You know, they're not to be told, they're to lead. And it takes time to build relationships and trust. That's not something that you're going to get on your first meeting, because you can, again, if you reflect back on what I spoke about earlier about our history and the path since colonialism to where we are today, we've lost a lot of trust, unfortunately, because of what's happened to us. So it's important to understand that. But you can build the trust, you can build that relationship, and that will enable you to be front and center in terms of developing ethical, whether it's an idea or an ethical project, because you've involved the particular groups or groups of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander in those conversations. And I couldn't recommend that more strongly. And it's good to have a yarn, and you don't talk about business first. It's important that you talk about your own history, because that's one of the conversations that we have as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. We're very interested in understanding where your mob's from, you know, who your family is. You know, the business talk, you know, comes secondary to building these relationships. And you know, in terms of the whole process around, I guess, the acknowledgement to country, that's not something that we've just made up for white fellas to understand, but it's a tradition, I guess, that we've done as a custom when we go from one nation to the next. We want to be welcomed by that nation into their country. It's no different to us knocking on the front door of our neighbour's house. We don't just go walking straight in. We asked if we can come in. So that whole process of building relationships and trust is absolutely fundamental foundation to reconciliation. And as I said, that'll help you along the path of making these ethical decisions in the future, because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander have been there with you on the journey to whatever decision process that you're looking at. Thanks.
Thanks, Shane. Kim, would you like to follow up as an EWBer? We have in our movement thousands of young engineers in the making who I imagine might be sort of following this quite closely. We're doing a lot of work around empowering engineers to have a voice. What are your thoughts on, you know, what is it that engineers need to be able to use that voice, so that if this sort of situation happens again, and one might argue it could happen again if we don't learn from what's happened, well, what is it that they can do? Who is it that they talk to? How do they not risk their career or should they risk their career when we're talking about this level of loss?
Yeah, it's such a hard question to answer without knowing, you know, what actually went on with that decision and how that decision was possibly made. You know, I think understanding compassion at an organizational level is a good starting point. Like having it, there's a lot of talk of, Erin touched on, sometimes a reconciliation action plan can be seen almost as a box tick, that there can be this sort of almost tokenism in a relationship. It's, if there's any integrity to an organization, and I don't want to get political at all, but you'd think that there would be a value and a respect there for the stakeholders of your organization and of your projects, which clearly was not valued and respected or understood. Hard to believe that it wasn't understood in this case. So something obviously went wrong. So I don't know what happened internally around this decision at Rio Tinto regarding the blasting, but you would hope that there were a few staff that raised concerns with this going ahead, and it's extremely worrisome to think that if due process was followed, that this decision ended up occurring and that this is what ended up happening. But I think Shane touched on earlier, I think personally, if we look at true reconciliation sort of as an Australian, then all Australians would see that a significant archaeological and cultural site in our nation is vastly more important to all of us than, you know, a bit more iron ore. So I don't really understand this decision at all. So I don't feel like I should probably weigh into it. But yeah, over to you, Andre and Erin or Shane, if you've got anything more to say to that.
Actually, I might just intervene and do a quick shout out to our participants if they would like to explore this topic more or something else. Love to see your question come up in the chat. You can just type it straight into the Q&A part, which is located down the bottom of your screen, and we'll attempt to answer that question when we finish up in this part here. But yeah, Shane, Andre, Erin, ethical engineering, what can engineers do? What should they do? What is needed?
Yeah, that's a massive question, and there's so many parts to it. And I think Shane's perspective in terms of really valuing everyone's voice equally is incredibly important, which potentially I could be saying something a bit more political here than and I might go down that. But I think one of the key things is having very open conversations and being aware that the fact that though technology can have significant benefit, it can be very destructive and further discriminate minority groups such as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose voice isn't being heard at times as much as other voices. And I think it's something we have seen in Australia in the past and still presently, and I believe technology comes with a risk when it's used indiscriminately in systems that are in a way entrenched in systemic racism and capitalist mentalities. And as a result, in Australia, we can have a bias then towards sort of economic rationalism over values such as community cohesion, the environment and culture. Now, the fantastic thing is I think these issues are being recognised, and as a country we are starting to talk about them a lot more openly, which is definitely the first step to change, which is heartwarming that we are not in a way covering this up. This is being discussed, and I think that is incredibly important that these issues are brought into the open. In terms of engineers, and they play a huge role in this. They're the ones developing and at time implementing these technologies. But at the same time, I think engineers need a lot more support and training to be able to understand such complex ethical issues. For example, I'm very for engineering courses. There should be a requirement that we should be doing ethic courses just as much as our technical design course, which I think are just as important. But it's not only that. Engineers have this real complex issue of they could be developing technologies which are ethical, which have taken in ethical considerations. But then the issue is once they're implemented in a system which has inherent biases within it, that's where the impacts might arise. So you also have this real difficulty as an engineer. You could be creating an ethical solution and an ethical problem, but once it's implemented in the system, that's where those issues arise, and that the level of potential discrimination or unethical decisions are made. So yeah, it's important to actually understand the systems as an engineer, and that's a lot of responsibility on us as well.
Andre, I saw you unmuted as our right brain, left brain community. So,
Yeah, totally. Let me just go.
What would you like to see?
Let me throw it into the left brain, right brain, the other side, just for, well, not for fun, but to challenge. Let me think. When I was studying master's degree, there was discussion about a concept of epistemological equity, which is one fancy sounding terminology. But I think that's an understanding that there's another worldview that exists that's different to our own. We have an epistemology. It's our Western kind of scientific paradigm that we view the world in, and very much engineers are heavily embedded in the application of that paradigm. And there's an, Indigenous perspectives are often seen as kind of more holistic and ecological based, social based, and much greater evolution of perhaps understandings of social environmental cohesion. And a culture was here for 60, 70, 80,000 years and managed to figure out how to survive sustainably without destroying itself over that period where we are so far away from that. And so I think when it comes to understanding cultural heritage on the landscape, I'm not an expert. I'm a white guy as well. But I also, I was an immigrant to this country from a small place in Scotland, the Orkney Islands, where we have 8,000 years of continual heritage. And I assumed that Australia was this young, empty landscape when I first came here. And I think a lot of engineers and companies like Rio tend to maybe assuming it's just a piece of rock in the ground. It's not. It's a sacred site. That's nice and cozy and comfortable. It takes a long time to really, truly understand the magnificence and significance of what is the cultural landscape that Australia is, which is an ancient thing, and the kind of knowledge systems which we don't have access to as non-Indigenous people, and we are not initiated, and we do not have access to anything other than a few sort of surface level stories which are pretty for kids. There's a much deeper knowledge system that's embedded in the landscape, and when you destroy one object in there, you're destroying so much more. And that's what I don't think is the true appreciation of when you destroy a cultural artifact. And it's not just a piece of rock, it's not just a cute thing from the past, it's living heritage. And I can't begin to fathom that as a non-Indigenous person. So Shane, hopefully I've done a decent job of trying to point out to engineers that there are other value systems that sit out there that it's hard to understand, but we can appreciate that from the outside, hopefully. So I don't know what an employee of Rio Tinto would have done in that situation. It would be very hard to try and point out, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. Oh, you're out the door. There's a whole management chain of decision making that's above you. But anyway, yeah, I can't really sort of say more. I feel really sad for what's happened out there. And I just think that it's a result of a broader system that has so much inertia behind it that just does not appreciate the other epistemological foundation of this country, which actually should be a massive asset. I mean, we have tens of thousands of years of cultural history and identity that we're not drawing on.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. It's not that we were going to solve that one today, but
no, I was looking for the answer.
It's an early one. It's so very, very complex, but one that I think that warrants thinking and discussion as we move towards greater acknowledgement and a total mindset shift personally in our profession, in our entire sector. we've got some guests in our panel. We've got our tech whiz Beatrix, who has beamed in Catherine by the looks. Catherine, I imagine, has a question for our panel. So Catherine, was the question for a particular panelist, or is it open for all?
Hi, thank you for answering the question. It's for the whole panel. I guess my question is broadly around the sort of balance of responsibility for starting a reconciliation journey. And I'm thinking about the sort of balance and tension between the imperative of nothing about us without us, and also the sort of increasing calls that I've been seeing on various media platforms that really the responsibility is for the broader community to educate ourselves. So just, yeah, I'm interested in the panel's views on the balance between those two sort of principles.
I can jump in with a very quick thought, but I think Shane and Erin, you probably have a lot more experience with that sort of getting companies started on that reconciliation journey. But I don't know that, so I might have understood your question around Catherine, but I don't know that there is a tension between, you know, starting engagement, but also self-education. Was that your tension, or was it a different tension you were talking about?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, I'm in an organisation with, you know, sort of relatively low sort of capability and understanding of Indigenous issues. And when we're sort of starting to think about building knowledge within our organisation, I'm concerned about the responsibility of that falling on the very few number of Indigenous folks that we do have within the organisation. So yeah, sort of the invisible workload and responsibility and pressure on Indigenous people in, you know, non-Indigenous organisations, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. Yeah,
sorry, no, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an action for every individual, not for just Indigenous people. Like if reconciliation is a two-way street, this isn't something that we have to, you know, we have to come to the table as white people. We can't be saying, well, that's for the Aboriginal people within our organisation to sort out. I think there's so much there's so much opportunity out there to educate yourself. There's some really positive resources available. There's online courses. There's lots of local Aboriginal groups that will offer cultural competency training or cultural awareness training. There's lots of opportunity there to learn more, to respect and share and connect with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and individuals in the areas where you are, and learn their stories and start appreciating some of that culture, in addition to then building those relationships. But yeah, I'll throw over to Erin or Shane or anyone else that wants to have a comment.
Yeah, I guess, oh, sorry, Shane, you go. Yeah, just to reiterate Kim's point that there is a lot of fantastic resources out there. Certainly Reconciliation Australia, if you do want to go down, I guess, the Reconciliation Action Plan development, they can support you with this sort of the entry level wraps in terms of the development of those and how you want to approach things. So really fantastic resources out there, but you're coming in at an entry level, and yes, you need to be aware of putting that burden on. If you do have Indigenous employees, it's not their job to educate that. It is very much a two-way knowledge, and as a company that there needs to be an investment, I think, and an understanding of that. And we're looking at things that can be done on a really simple level. Before you start a meeting, you can simply start meetings by actually asking people before a meeting to come with the name of the traditional owners of the land in which they're originally from, where they were born, or something like that. Because more than likely, if there has been very little engagement, most people won't know, and it's just to start that discussion, start those the thinking, and once that happens, hopefully then you can develop and look at alternative ways for engagement and different types of action. But there is a lot of, at the entry level, to facilitate those discussions and starting to have an acceptance, I think, in your company that, we should be doing this, and this journey to reconciliation is important, and yes, this is the norm, this isn't, we're just not doing this for a box ticking thing. And yeah, I'm sure Shane has a lot of wonderful comments as well.
Yeah, look, I think fundamental to the success of a reconciliation and within your organisation is true leadership and having the right culture. As we know, change management within an organisation is very difficult, and if it's not led from both the top and from the bottom, you will not get change. And I think that's important, where I talked about this earlier about making sure that we hold our leadership team within the organisations to account, because it's important that they are leading the way. And I always talk about, I guess, safety and the journey that construction and mining came from 10, 15 years ago to where we are today, where a death or an injury in the workplace 10, 15 years ago was something that happened all the time. And it took, I guess, strength, will and management and as a collective for us to change the culture in our organisations to not accept that a person should get injured in the workplace. And we can use those same fundamentals. You look at whether you're a publicly listed organisation or a privately owned or an NGO or a not-for-profit. We record statistics on how we perform around safety, and it becomes a cognizant, learnt behaviour that we just do it as part of our role. I want to see reconciliation and how we engage with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander the same format as how we've learnt safety. I think we've been able to do it from a safety perspective. There's no reason that we can't head down this pathway, because it's probably even more critical, because it's such an important part of our whole Australian culture is engaging with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And as we said, we've got such a rich history, 60,000 odd years of continuous connection to the lands and seas. And, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, we're the custodians of this land and the sea, and we've been entrusted to manage it, and we've done that sustainably for so long. So there's a great opportunity to learn from that as a business: sustainability, culture, family, relationship, connections. So it's got to start from the top with management, hold them to account, otherwise it won't be successful.
Thanks, Shane. It looks like we've got another question. Ian, do we have you with us in the panel room?
Yeah, just presuming you can hear me. This one was probably for either Andre or Shane, and just acknowledging Shane's comment earlier about having Aboriginal people front and centre of projects. And I'll start my video. And yeah, just curious, like, hi everyone. You know, we have this spectrum of participation from consulting through to this level of leadership, and I'm curious just if you've got some examples of when that's being overdone. You know, because it can be, yeah, people have got important things to do in their lives too, and versus underdone. I think probably generally we're in the realm of underdoing this kind of thing, but also be interested to hear about the other side of things as well.
So I guess the question is kind of about where can we, I want to address the overdone thing, you know. I think it's a challenge that is probably more common in remote Australia, where there's over consultation going on. Every single organisation wants to do the right thing and have a relationship with the traditional owners, and have participation, involvement, and leadership and control, you know, and ownership by the traditional owners in the projects that they're running. The problem is you've got about 30 different organizations all trying to clamber over each other to make sure that the traditional owners are empowered and participating. And you know what? Aboriginal people are often really busy. They often got jobs, surprisingly enough, in that it's almost a little bit discriminatory, or, you know, to assume that everybody's ready to come and participate in your event when you turn up, and when it's right for your work schedule. So that's a very important aspect of you know, people working in the cross-cultural sector and doing any engineering projects where you need participation. So it happens a lot. So I think there's a time and a place for engagement, and time and a place not to engage, and to work with local partners who maybe have already done the engagement, or local plans, or so engineers without borders come and work with us, because we've already got the existing relationship and we know what consultation engagement has already happened, and what's needed and what's not, to a degree. So I think that, yeah, I'm just saying that there's quite a lot of examples of over consultation. Shane, do you want to respond? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And I might ask one follow-up one too, which either Shane or yourself can answer. I'm just curious as how you acknowledge that input too. Celebrate it, reward it financially, what different ways that, or maybe some examples of when that's been done really, really well.
When you go, Shane, have you got some comments?
I guess it's, for me, a perfect example of stakeholder engagement and management is recently, we talk about the last 2 years. Larrakia have been in discussions with the Northern Territory government about a land claim which is on the Cox Peninsula, which is across the harbour from Darwin City. And part of that land claim is that part of the land needs to be rehabilitated because it was used as a land refuge and dumping of general waste and asbestos and other contaminants. So that land needs to be cleaned up so the land can be handed back to Larrakia. And I guess Larrakia wanted to be in control of that process. They wanted to build capabilities in terms of being able to deliver that particular service. And they actually reached out to us as an Aboriginal business, and we joint ventured as a party to now clean up that particular rubbish tip, and over the next 12 months we'll build capability, transfer knowledge of how to deliver projects to the Larrakia people. So out of this they'll be able to provide a different service offering to what they've got now, and more importantly that they'll be given back land that is back into its natural state, and they'll be able to use that land once the natal title claim has been signed off. So it was a great result in terms of stakeholder management from Larrakia, both at federal and state, or federal and territory, and then engaging with us so they could deliver the works.
I might interrupt. Ian, thank you so much for your question. Beatrix, thank you so much for organising our tech. We're almost at time, so my apologies. We're certainly going to go maybe 4 or so minutes over. We are going to bring our webinar to a close, but there is a final question that we'd like to ask. So our Engineering on Country Program Ambassador, Bruce Pascoe, said, "I think EWB's Engineering on Country program is a great part of our country's recovery. But what we need is action, and it's action that's going to change the world." So as some parting advice or reflections, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what concrete actions the individuals on our call can take towards reconciliation.
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. I think we've touched on a lot of the things through the discussion today, actually. If you're an engineer and you're in an organisation, depending on what level you're at, you can look at engaging with the company's corporate social responsibility plan. Ask, do they have a RAP? If they do, get involved with that. If you're at a level of leadership in your country, in your company, well, you need to start thinking about, as an organisation, are we moving together in the role of reconciliation? If not, what could I do to influence change, whether it's looking at inclusivity, or looking at measures to increase sort of that engagement around reconciliation. As well, uni students, if you're a volunteer, you want to volunteer, there are some fantastic programs within Engineers Without Borders. They have a fantastic STEM education program where you can get trained to deliver workshops. You can also talk to, Kim is a fantastic example. She's leading up EWB's Engineering on Country program for EWB, where there's some amazing pro bono work that you could get involved in as well. So there's a lot of platforms that you could actually start your engagement. And depending on where you are in your journey as well, it might simply be educating yourself, starting to having those open discussions about reconciliation, reading some more, and having the courage to have conversations and respectfully listen to different perspectives and those different worldviews that people do have that might be incredibly different to yours.
Beautiful. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, look, I'll just follow on to that. I think getting involved in some of these national events such as Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC Week, I think there's a perfect opportunity for you to build a relationship with the local community of which you live in or you happen to be visiting at the time. I think also there's an opportunity where you could be promoting within your organisation's opportunity for increasing more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employees within your business. Look at how you may be able to include Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander businesses into your supply chain, because there's such a diverse lot of businesses out there that are providing all sorts of products and services that no doubt they would be able to serve and provide those services to your organisations. And as I said, you know, go back around, learn about our wonderful history. There's so many, you know, literature out there about that. You know, learn from your local elders and about some of the stories about and connecting to the country that you're on. And ultimately, I think it's important to come back to in terms of action. Let's hold our organisations to account to ensure that they're delivering on these promises, and they're not just simply words. Because you know, without actions, we're not going to be able to move forward in this journey of reconciliation with the oldest living culture in the world.
Thank you, Shane. Kim, Andre, final reflections, bits of advice? Oh,
yeah, my spacebar thing wasn't working. I think Shane and Erin have done a really good job there, and I'll take it left field again, is to go spend some time on country as best you can. Try and understand a different perspective, a way to look at the universe. But also, as Shane said, you know, there's so much information out there. Educate yourself, I think, is really important about the history and culture of Australia before settlement, because I think there's a lot of misinformation or assumed interpretations of history that are completely incorrect. And there's also, you know, a terrible tragedy and injustice when you start really unearthing the stories of what happened. Read Bruce Pascoe's book, you know, a great eye-opener. You know, another great book's Treading Lightly. I can't remember the author, but that opened my worldview to an understanding of how Indigenous people really had a complex, evolved society. Yeah, so I think that's the main responsibility. You need to educate yourself to understand the culture that surrounds you, and then you know, obviously go and encourage your engineering company to sign up to EWB and to do some pro bono, offer some pro bono, so that you know, organizations like CAT can really direct some of that engineering power to help the Indigenous mob on country out there in the remote areas that actually do need a bit of intensive technical assistance to do the things that they really need to do in country to keep their culture and their country strong.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Thanks, Andre. And just to close out, Kim,
Perfect. Yeah, no, exactly what everybody else has said. Just on those very tangible ways of getting involved with EWB and our Engineering on Country program, as Andre said, if you've got a company that isn't signed up to do pro bono work with us, encourage them to do so. We'd love to have more engineers and more companies on board to be able to expand what we can do and you know, work with more people and do more projects and work more deeply with people. That would be wonderful. Volunteer on one of our technology development projects that we're now doing. We've got an open mobilisation challenge open now. Have a look, get involved and spread the word to other people who might be interested in providing some technical input to things like that. And sign up for spending some time on country, like Andre said, once our tours are back up and running, and access to communities is back on the table. But yeah, educate yourselves and get involved, and we'd love to help facilitate that if we can, through either pro bono or individual volunteering as well.
Beautiful. Well, we're at 5 past, so my apologies. We have gone over, but the conversation was so interesting. Beatrix tells me that there were loads of questions queued up, so I'm so sorry that we didn't get to have more people join our panelists, but we actually have a record of those questions, so we will summarise the conversation. There were a few great you know, info drops around books and bits and pieces, and we'll do our best to sort of capture those and link those to you in a follow-up email. But yeah, that's it from us for now. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our tech folks, and thanks to all the participants for joining us to participate in this important conversation.